Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez, and you're listening to episode 40 of our special series, The Dark Record, where we uncover history's eeriest stories, one strange and unsettling case at a time. On the evening of October 21st, 1978, a young pilot named Frederick Valentich took off from Moorabbin Airport near Melbourne, Australia. His destination was King Island, a small strip of land across the Bass Strait. But somewhere over the dark waters, Valentich radioed air traffic control with a chilling report. He claimed an unknown craft was hovering above him, metallic, shining, and glowing with green lights. His last words ended with a final, haunting phrase, "It's not an aircraft." Moments later, both he and his Cessna vanished without a trace. The next entry into the dark record, the vanishing of Frederick Valentich. Let's begin. Before his name became tied to one of Australia's most enduring mysteries, Frederick Valentich was simply a young man chasing the dream of flight. Born on June 9, 1958, he grew up in Melbourne, fascinated by aviation and eager to make it his career. At 20 years old, he was a member of the Royal Australian Air Force Air Training Corps and had logged around 150 hours of flying time. It wasn't much by commercial standards, but enough to earn him the credentials of a private pilot. He also held a Class 4 instrument rating, which allowed him to fly at night, but only under visual conditions. Those who knew Valentich described him as determined, if sometimes struggling under the weight of ambition. His record wasn't spotless. He had applied several times for entry into commercial pilot training, but failed his exams more than once. He also had a handful of flying incidents on his record. On one occasion, he strayed into restricted airspace near Sydney, earning him a warning from authorities. On another, he entered cloud cover against regulations, showing lapses in judgment that suggested inexperience more than recklessness. To instructors, he was a young pilot eager to prove himself, but still learning the hard lessons of discipline and precision. Outside of aviation, Valentich was known for his fascination with unexplained phenomena, particularly UFOs. His father later admitted that Frederick was deeply interested in the subject, sometimes speaking openly about it. Less than a week before his disappearance, he had joked to family and friends about being abducted by aliens. To most, it seemed like idle talk, the sort of thing a curious young man might say after reading about lights in the sky or hearing popular accounts in the news. But after October 21st, those words would take on an eerie new weight. On that day, Valentich rented a single-engine Cessna 182L with the call sign VH-DSJ. His plan, at least according to what he told others, was to fly across the Bass Strait to King Island. But his reasons for the trip were hazy. To some, he said he was going to pick up friends. To others, he mentioned catching crayfish. The friends never materialized, and no arrangements had been made on the island for a landing. Oddly, he hadn't even filed a proper flight plan for arrival, something expected of a trained pilot. Whatever his true motive, Valentich prepared his aircraft, fueled it for the journey, and set off toward the sea. In the hours before his disappearance, he looked like countless other young aviators, hopeful, eager, and still carving a place for himself in the skies. But by nightfall, his name would be forever tied not to his aspirations, but to a chilling transmission and the silence that followed. Frederick Valentich departed Moorabbin Airport just after sunset on October 21, 1978. The 125-mile route south to King Island was one he had chosen himself, though no clear reason for the trip ever surfaced. Some thought he was planning to visit friends. Others believed he was after fresh crayfish. In reality, there were no friends waiting for him, no dinner plans arranged. Whatever his motive, Valentich fueled his rented Cessna 182L, call sign VH-DSJ, and set off into the twilight. The Bass Strait, which stretched between the Australian mainland and Tasmania, had a reputation for danger. Its waters were notoriously rough, its weather often unpredictable, and more than a few ships and planes had vanished in the region over the years. Still, conditions that evening were calm. Valentich, just 20 years old, should have had little to fear as he climbed into the dusky sky. At first, the flight seemed routine, but at 7:06 p.m., Valentich made his first unusual call to Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice was steady, but his report was strange. He said another aircraft appeared to be following him about 1,000 feet above. Controllers were puzzled. There was no known traffic in the area. They checked their logs. Nothing was there. Valentich pressed on, insisting he wasn't mistaken. Over the next minutes, the conversation grew more alarming. He described a craft that didn't look like any plane he recognized. Shiny and metallic, it reflected light in odd ways, with green illumination glowing around it. At one point, he claimed it passed directly overhead at high speed. "It's not an aircraft," he said, a phrase that froze the room back in Melbourne. Valentich also reported the object orbiting above him, circling in a way that seemed deliberate, as if toying with his Cessna. He described 4 bright landing lights, maneuvering with impossible agility. Air traffic controllers tried to calm him, asking him to clarify his position and describe the craft more carefully, but his responses were erratic. His focus was fixed on what was happening above. Then, his report shifted from description to distress. He said his engine was beginning to run rough, as if the aircraft itself was faltering under the strange encounter. His last words were cut short, ending with a strangled phrase, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." At that moment, the radio filled with a harsh, metallic sound, scraping, grinding, lasting 17 long seconds. Let's listen to the real audio now.
This is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet?
No known traffic.
Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet.
What type of aircraft is it?
I cannot confirm. It's 4 bright, seems to me like landing lights. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity?
No known aircraft in the vicinity.
Seems to be playing some sort of game. He's flying over me. Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft, it's...
Can you describe the aircraft?
As it's flying past, it's a long shape. Cannot identify it, it has such speed. It's before me right now, Melbourne.
How large would the object be?
Seems like it's stationary. What it's doing right now is orbiting. The thing is just orbiting on top of me. It's also got a green light and a sort of metallic, like, it's shiny on the outside. It's just vanished. That strange aircraft's hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
And then, nothing. Silence filled the channel. Controllers waited, tried to raise him again, but there was no response. Valentich and his Cessna had vanished into the night. For those listening in Melbourne, it was a chilling moment. They had heard a pilot's growing panic, his insistence on being pursued, and the eerie final burst of noise. Then he was gone, leaving behind no more than a handful of words and a mystery that would endure for decades. When Frederick Valentich's transmissions went silent on the evening of October 21st, 1978, air traffic controllers at Melbourne knew something had gone terribly wrong. Within minutes, they alerted search and rescue teams. And by that night, aircraft were already sweeping the Bass Strait. What followed was one of the most extensive searches in Australian aviation history. For 4 days, planes and ships scoured the waters between Cape Otway and King Island, covering more than 1,000 square miles. Pilots reported calm weather and excellent visibility, conditions that should have made it easy to spot wreckage. Yet nothing surfaced. No oil slicks, no floating debris, no signs of an aircraft forced down at sea. It was as though Valentich and his Cessna had been plucked out of the sky and erased. The official search ended on October 25th with no trace of the missing pilot. For his family, the lack of answers only deepened the shock. His father, Guido Valentich, refused to believe his son had simply crashed. He insisted that Frederick had been taken by a UFO, pointing to his son's own words from the radio call. The press seized on that line, and almost overnight, the case exploded into headlines around the world. The Department of Transport, however, was careful not to lean into speculation. Their investigation began with the basics. Valentich had filed a flight plan, but curiously, he had failed to arrange for landing clearance at King Island. Investigators also noted his history of minor infractions as a pilot, straying into controlled airspace, flying into clouds against regulations, and concluded that his inexperience might have played a role. But without a plane, their conclusions remain guesswork. Then, in 1983, 5 years after his disappearance, an unexpected discovery reopened the case. A cowl flap from a Cessna 182 washed ashore on Flinders Island, about 300 miles from where Valentich had vanished. Investigators examined the part closely and determined it matched the range of serial numbers from the missing aircraft. To them, it suggested the Cessna had indeed gone down in the Bass Strait, its wreckage carried by currents before breaking apart. Yet even this clue fell short of providing closure. No other wreckage was found, and nobody was ever recovered. The Department of Transport's final report left the cause of the disappearance undetermined. Their working assumption was that Valentich had been killed in a presumed crash at sea, but they could not explain the metallic noises on the recording, nor the pilot's repeated descriptions of an unidentified craft. In the end, the report acknowledged the facts but offered no resolution. For investigators, the mystery lay not only in what was missing, the wreckage, the body, the evidence, but in what remained. A calm evening, a competent, if inexperienced pilot, a chilling radio transmission, and silence. The unanswered questions kept the case alive long after the official files were closed, feeding speculation that went far beyond ordinary aviation accidents. In the years following Valentich's disappearance, speculation grew into a storm of theories. With no wreckage and only a handful of chilling words preserved on tape, the case became a blank canvas where belief and doubt clashed. Each theory tried to answer the same question: what really happened over the Bass Strait that October evening? The most sensational explanation, and the one that captured public imagination almost immediately, was that Valentich had encountered a UFO. His final transmissions gave fuel to the idea. He spoke of a shiny, metallic craft with green lights that maneuvered in ways beyond anything conventional. His insistence that it's not an aircraft was replayed in newspapers and on television, cementing the encounter as something extraterrestrial. Witnesses later came forward claiming to have seen strange lights in the sky around the same time, and even photographs taken by a local plumber named Roy Manifold were said to show a fast-moving object over the strait. To UFO enthusiasts, Valentich had been intercepted, maybe even abducted, by forces beyond our world. But skeptics pointed out that UFO explanations often lean on suggestion rather than evidence. The Manifold photographs, when analyzed, turned out to be ambiguous, possibly nothing more than birds or lens artifacts. And the green glow Valentich reported might have been less alien and more astronomical. On that night, the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, along with the bright star Antares, were visible above the horizon. Some experts suggested that Valentich, already anxious, could have mistaken these celestial lights for a pursuing craft, especially if he was disoriented. This led to another theory: pilot error and a phenomenon known as a graveyard spiral. If Valentich became spatially disoriented while flying over the dark waters, he might have entered a banking descent without realizing it. The sensation of a steady flight can persist even while losing altitude in a slow spiral. His description of the aircraft orbiting above could have been his own disorientation, seeing lights appear to move as his Cessna turned downward. The rough engine he reported might have been the engine laboring under stress or starved for fuel in unusual attitudes. Skeptical investigators Joe Nickel and James McGaha later argued that this was the most likely explanation, with the final metallic scraping noise on the recording possibly the sound of air turbulence and engine interference in the last seconds before impact. Other theories have been floated but carry less weight. Some suggested Valentich staged his disappearance, using the flight as cover to vanish deliberately. Reports of a light aircraft landing near Cape Otway that night briefly fanned these suspicions, but there was no motive and no credible evidence. Suicide was also mentioned, though family and friends firmly rejected the idea, pointing to his passion for flying and lack of personal troubles. In the end, every theory has its flaws. The UFO explanation rests on faith in eyewitness accounts and the mystery of his words. The disorientation theory explains more, but it still leaves the unnerving audio unanswered. With no wreckage to study, the truth remains elusive. And perhaps that is why the Valentich case has endured. Because every theory feels possible, and none feels complete. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich quickly grew beyond a local tragedy into an international mystery. Within days, his story was being reported across Australia and overseas, his final radio transmission replayed in newspapers and on television. The words, "It's not an aircraft," carried a weight that few other aviation incidents ever had. For many, Valentich's case was not just another accident. It was evidence of something extraordinary. UFO researchers seized on the story as one of the strongest encounters ever recorded. Unlike blurry photographs or second-hand testimonies, Valentich's final minutes were preserved through official air traffic control tapes. That made them part of the public record, impossible to dismiss as folklore or hearsay. The eerie 17-second burst of metallic noise at the end of the recording became a staple of UFO documentaries, often presented as proof that something unnatural had occurred. His case appeared in books, television specials, and later, internet forums devoted to the unexplained. In Australia, the incident quickly became one of the nation's most famous aviation mysteries, often compared to the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in terms of its intrigue and enduring lack of closure. The Bass Strait, already known for its reputation as a dangerous stretch of water, gained an almost supernatural aura in the public imagination. Stories circulated about other strange vanishings in the area, building a mythology around Valentich's flight that extended far beyond the facts of the case. The discovery of the cowl flap in 1983 briefly rekindled mainstream coverage, but it did little to dampen speculation. For believers, a single piece of wreckage was not enough to erase the possibility of abduction. For skeptics, it was the only tangible evidence to ground the case in earthly explanations. The divide between the two camps, those who saw aliens and those who saw error, remains as sharp today as it was in 1978. Culturally, Valentich's disappearance has endured because it sits at the crossroads of aviation history and the UFO phenomenon. It has been retold on radio, television, and in countless articles as both a cautionary tale and a piece of paranormal lore. The image of a young pilot lost in the night sky after describing an impossible craft continues to resonate decades later. Even outside UFO circles, his story raises unsettling questions about perception, technology, and the limits of human judgment. Was he fooled by celestial lights, undone by his own inexperience? Or did he encounter something truly beyond our understanding? The lack of definitive answers has allowed the mystery to persist, retold with each new generation of readers and listeners. For Valentich's family, however, the case is less about theories and more about loss. His father never gave up hope that his son had been taken, not killed. And for many years he spoke publicly about that belief. It is a reminder that behind the headlines and speculation, there was a 20-year-old with dreams of flying, whose fate will likely never be known. In the end, Valentich's disappearance remains more than an aviation mystery. It has become a cultural landmark, one of those rare stories where tragedy, speculation, and legend blur into something that refuses to fade. What unsettles me most about Frederick Valentich's disappearance isn't just the mystery itself, but the humanity behind it. At its heart, this is the story of a young man, a 20-year-old with ambition, with flaws, with dreams of a career in aviation, who set out across a stretch of water and never came back. His final words, recorded over a crackling radio, have echoed for decades because they capture the raw edge of fear and uncertainty. It's not an aircraft. That sentence alone feels like a dividing line between the explainable and the unexplainable. If Valentich crashed because of disorientation, then this is a tragic but understandable story of a pilot undone by inexperience. It reminds us how unforgiving the sky can be, and how even a small lapse in judgment can have fatal consequences. But if we take his words at face value, the case transforms into something far stranger, an encounter with the unknown that left no physical trace. That duality, the constant tug between accident and anomaly, is what keeps this story alive. There's something haunting about hearing someone's last moments preserved in real time. Most aviation mysteries leave us with wreckage, or at least silence. But here, we have a voice. Valentich wasn't just lost, he was narrating his final minutes, aware that something was wrong, that something was out there with him. We can only imagine what he saw as he looked through the cockpit window into the night sky. In the absence of answers, we're left with echoes, a radio call, a scrap of debris found years later, a family's grief, and a mystery that no investigation has ever been able to close. The line between skepticism and belief remains blurred, and perhaps it always will. Whether Valentich was a victim of his own disorientation or of something that defies our understanding, his story endures because it reminds us of the limits of certainty. The night sky has always carried wonder and danger in equal measure. For Frederick Valentich, it held both, and for the rest of us, it left behind one of history's most enduring questions. That brings us to the end of episode 40 of The Dark Record. We've traced the final flight of Frederick Valentich, a young pilot who vanished over the Bass Strait after reporting a strange, metallic craft hovering above him. His words and the eerie transmission he left behind have fueled decades of speculation. Was it disorientation, mechanical failure, or something not of this world? We may never know. What remains is a mystery that has refused to fade, remembered in equal parts as tragedy and legend. Remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we leave the open skies and turn to the dark forests, swamps, and strange lands of Massachusetts. It's an area where UFOs, strange lights, cryptids, and hauntings converge into one of America's most mysterious regions. We'll explore the Bridgewater Triangle. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or at our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Keep your eyes on the shadows, and remember, one pilot vanished into the night, but his last words still hang in the air like a question no one can answer. Have a good night.